generative AI has obviously been the big story of the last few years, and it seems to be changing pretty fast. So what trends are you seeing at the moment?
I think you're right. It feels like crypto did maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where every morning you'd wake up and there'd be a new paper and the world would have changed. And I definitely feel that way. I think we're all waiting with bated breath for the next generation of the models, the ones that Facebook, Meta has promised, that GPT-5, which seem like they'll be able to work on much longer duration tasks. So until we know what that looks like. But in the meantime, I think there's definitely been a shift, I would say last year to this year, from preferring co-pilots, which complete your sentences, to agents, which will fully automate work, or at least some fraction of the rote work.
Okay, no, that's very interesting because, there's been a big refrain of the last year or two. Like, AI is not going to take your job, it's going to augment it, but agents sort of promise to just like automate things and completely take away that human from the loop. So, tell me more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think what we've seen some of the productivity stats on copilots, which are about 50 to 75%. That's Microsoft and ServiceNow, the other way around. Microsoft is 75. If the LLM agents are anything like mechanical robots, the promise is to increase productivity by about 250%. So one robot would take the place of 2.5 humans, which is what's happened on automotive manufacturing lines. We're still really early there. I would say we're starting to see the very first applications of this in security automation or customer support, where Klarna cut 2/3 of their customer support staff. And we can debate the relative effectiveness of the bots, but they did it and they saved a lot of money doing it. And so I think what we're seeing across the industry, people are really excited about this trend. And the nature of like entry level tasks will change. There was a really interesting Twitter thread about this where they were talking about, so where robots have taken off in the last 10 years is robotic surgery, particularly like urology, or areas in the body where there's just a very difficult space to navigate. And as a result, robots, they can move in ways that humans can't because their fingers, so to speak, are much narrower. There's now this training gap where the senior surgeons are no longer teaching the junior surgeons side by side. The junior surgeons are now just watching the robot operate. And so as a result, there'll be this generation of surgeons or security analysts or customer support reps who are experts in the domain. And then the younger ones don't receive the benefit of the training. And so that's an interesting dynamic that we're sort of paying attention to. But in terms of like the technology itself, we're looking for tasks where there's a lot of summarization, maybe some initial customization. Some of these agents are actually starting to write their own queries to hit external databases to enrich and then produce a summary output. And then that goes to a classifier that says, is this worth a human's attention or not?
So on the other side of AI, so what about non-generative AI? Are you seeing any changes there?
I think it's not moving as fast. It's not to say that it's not important. We're starting to see combinations of generative AI and we'll call them classical methods. One reason for this is that the generative AI mechanisms tend to be chaotic and non-deterministic. If I ask, how do I reset my password, period, and I ask the question, how do I reset my password, space, period, it's a different question that will elicit a different answer from a generative AI model. And if you start to chain these inputs and outputs across generative AI steps, you might have error that explodes. And so and this is very early on, but we're starting to see companies take the output of a generative AI step and then apply a classical machine learning method to it to classify it, or just to kind of constrain the error, and then pass it on to the next step, We've met a company recently where there's 3 or 4 different kinds of machine learning that are being used all in one system. Generative AI is really good at 2 different things. It's really good at generating ideas. So, what are 5 great titles for this blog post that I wrote right now? And then deterministic methods or the classical methods are the ones that are really good at picking. And so I think you'll see this nice marriage between the two, where most generative AI applications will not be entirely Gen AI. They won't just be the wrappers. And as we get to the next step, you'll see, we call them constellations of models. And so there's, just to kind of talk about it in one level more detail, input from the user comes in. There's a classifier that could be a classical classifier or a Gen AI classifier that says, what kind of query is this? Have I seen this before? And then given that output, it passes it either to a small language GenAI model that knows what it's talking about, or if it's like a completely new query, it goes to something like a chat GPT-4 because it can handle a whole universe, or if you go to a classical.